Yeah, so welcome everyone. So my name's Grant and I'm joined by my colleague Sam McDonald, and we're going to be presenting exploring the latest trends in the Australian graduate recruitment market. So we've got a jam-packed session today. We're going to cover quite a lot. We might speed read at times as well because there's plenty of data to digest and get through. So we're going to be covering up a lot in this morning's session. So we're going to be walking through search and applications trends. So Sam's going to hand the mic to you in a moment, Sam. I'm then going to be taking us through the location search trends. So where are students searching from? What regions are they most popular? And we've got sort of year-on-year comparisons on that as well. Opportunity and salary trends. A lot of the audience will know that Prosper enforced publishing salary on jobs midway through last year, Sam. I think it was June or July last year. And so we're going to have a bit of a deep dive in terms of the effect the impact that's having on students. We're hearing from students they really like that and they're much preferring to use the jobs board than in previous years. We'll dive into some of the data as well in terms of what jobs are more popular, especially when it comes to salary trends. So what you're paying your grads on those jobs. And we're also going to be diving into completion and commencement data. That's the DESI data that we like to use acronyms for. So that's the Department of Education, Skills and Employment data that I'm going to be walking through a little bit later on. And then we've got some tips and Q&A as well at the end. Like I said, there's got much to cover. So we'll try and allocate 10 to 15 minutes at the end to go for all your questions. But feel free, throughout today's session, to drop some questions in the chat as you go, and we'll pick them up at the end. Actually, it's easier, please don't do it in the chat, do it in the Q&A, and it's much easier for Sam and I to manage when we get to the end and I'll walk through the Q&A. So just as a quick backdrop for who Prosper are, if you don't know what we do, our mission and vision is to help every student globally get the best possible start to their career. And we do that through running online job boards like Prosper Australia, formerly known as Grad Australia. We made that change last Monday, which is really exciting to consolidate all our brands under the Prosper umbrella, per se. So we run job boards in Australia, New Zealand, Indonesia, India, and many other countries. And we also partner with associations and universities, so the likes of New South Wales, UTS, UWA, and associations like Engineers Australia, to run their jobs boards and help their students and their student members find employment. So like I said at the start, my name's Grant. I'm the head of employer partnerships here at Prosper and joined today by my colleague, Sam McDonald, who's an enterprise partnerships manager, and many of you on call will know as well. So for the next part, Sam, I think I'm handing the mic to you to walk through the application and search trends.
Awesome. Thanks, Grant. Much appreciated. Before we go any further, I would like to just quickly acknowledge and pay respects to the traditional custodians of the land on which we all meet today. For me here in Melbourne, that is the Wurundjeri people of the Eastern Kulin Nation. I'd also like to pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. But yeah, let's jump into some of these awesome stats that we've got for us this year, talking about what we've seen at Prosper over the last couple of months to start off this year. And it's definitely been another interesting year in the grad and intern recruitment space. Fortunately, some good news this year, particularly compared to last. We've seen a huge jump, 71% increase in the number of applications that our platform has seen year to date, which is fantastic, particularly after what we all saw last year across all the different channels and that students were making less job applications or receiving less applications. So this year, as a total, as an aggregate, what we've seen is a 71% increase, which for reference takes us back to levels similar to what we've seen in 2020 and 2021. And this trend's remained pretty consistent for each month of the year to date as well. In fact, I think I was looking at some of the stats for May. Well, we're actually one day left to go, I believe, yeah, 30 days, yep. We've actually seen the most applications we've ever received in the month of May this year to date. Awesome results to see that we're seeing more students applying for jobs. So what's causing this trend? So firstly, jump to the next slide, Grant. We've definitely seen, just the next slide, Grant. Yeah, there we go. We've seen more students looking and searching for jobs. So this graph here that I'm showing you, just to clarify, it's not the total number of users we've seen on the platform, but rather the total number of searches on the jobs board that students are making. And so that's gone up huge amounts. Every user, every student on the platform is actually searching more often and making more searches for jobs, trying to see what jobs are out there, looking at different pages, applying all the different filters and all that sort of great stuff. So they're actually making a huge increase in the number of job searches, especially over the key campaign period of March and April. Our user numbers as well, for reference, the number of students we're seeing on the platform has gone up year on year. Again, it's at an all-time high. Not as big a jump in comparison to the number of job searches though. So what we're seeing is there are more students on the platform, but they are actually just doing more proactive research, which is great. Also, what's driven the change, if we just jump to the next slide, Grant, is the fact that of those searches, they're looking at more jobs, checking it out, reading your job descriptions, clicking just a couple of different jobs and whatnot. Not only are they looking at more jobs, they're actually going on to then apply for more jobs as well. It's about 24% increase year on year, the number of applications that our students have been making, which again, for reference, gets us back up to about the same levels of that 2021, 2020 numbers of applications that students are making. So on average, I think we took from AG data that roughly students were making about 7 applications year on year last year. So that number's gone up to about 9 on average again as well, which is fantastic. So they're looking at more jobs, making more searches, being more proactive with the searches, and then going on to apply for more jobs as well. Plus also the more students online this year as well. So some great trends. However, not every sector we've found has had that same impact of that increased application numbers. So we've seen some really interesting trends in terms of proportion of applications students are making towards our different sectors. Now, some, like for example, the banking has gone up slightly. Our retail and consumer goods sectors had a huge jump from 7% of the proportion of applications last year to 11%. Mining oil gas, again, a big jump. Manufacturing, also a huge jump. So we've seen some sectors have gone up quite significantly year on year in terms of the proportion of applications they receive as the overall total. Whereas some, technology being one, government being a huge decreaser year on year, have seen drops in the proportion of applications they've received. They might have received more as an overall aggregate, but what they've got less of is the proportion of students. Very interesting trends in terms of what we're seeing. And I think that jump for government in particular is quite stark, from 10% being our 4th most popular sector last year to down to 5% as well. That's state, federal, and local for reference. So that's a little bit more about industry trends. Good to also look at, of course, the degree trends. So what are individual students, whether they're engineers or IT students or business students, what do they do? Overall, just to look a little bit, what we're seeing is the number of IT students searching online, looking for jobs has gone up dramatically by about 3% year on year. I think it makes it's our 2nd most popular degree type this year, funnily enough, up from 3rd last year. Whereas business, about on par, about 34%, a little bit of maybe decimal points between them. Engineering down about 1%, a couple of others like humanities, law down a little bit too. It's worth noting with law though, however, this data only tracks it to May of this year. And so a lot of law searches do happen in that July, August, September period for our law firm clerkship period. So a little bit more to come for that, I'm sure, but still very interesting to track the difference between the two starts of the year, year on year as well. Building on from that as well, in terms of our gender split and the proportion that we've seen so far this year, building on from the fact that engineers are actually the fewer of them searching online this year, we've also seen there are fewer females of that proportion searching online this year by about 3%. The opposite end of the spectrum, we've seen more law students jump up, more female law students, so the proportion of males have gone down significantly for that field of study as well, but very interesting that we're seeing less engineers, a huge less, that's only from again 20 to 19%, but less of those students searching and fewer again of those students are female. But in terms of where that cohort, so obviously, as I said, it's interesting trends about the proportion of what students are studying, where they're, how many of them there are overall. We've seen some even more interesting trends in terms of where those different cohorts are going on to apply. Starting with business students, we'll do a couple of those different degree types. We've seen business students have made great strides in the diversity of where they're applying. Last year, we saw about 5 sectors really dominate the applications for our business and management students. By the way, for us at Prosper, we class our business management students, your accountants, your economics students, your HR, everything within that sort of commerce business faculty for reference. The proportion of that has become much more even this year, interestingly, as you can see by that distribution plot. One fact that I think is really interesting, Grant, I think we will talk about this a little bit beforehand as well, but what we're seeing is quite interesting and really backed up on what our clients are saying is that drop in the proportion of applications the accounting industry is getting from a clear favorite last year to a more even 21%. Still the number one industry for that proportion, but definitely fewer of the proportion year on year. I think it's a really interesting trend, something we've been hearing directly from a lot of our accounting firms as well. It's been a bit more difficult to attract students from those business accounting faculties as well. Moving on to IT, what we've seen with our IT students this year, again, a very similar trend in that the proportion of applications has been a lot more diverse this year. Last year, it was really focused on your technology firms. What third of applications went to our tech firms from IT students, and then split down afterwards as well. This year, again, a lot more even in that distribution. We're seeing that across the board, our students from IT are looking at more organizations, whether it be our accountants that actually had a big rise in the IT students that received this year. Same with government, same with engineering consulting, a huge jump in a couple of those different sectors. Year-on-year trading almost doubled as well. So very interesting trends that we're seeing. The IT cohort are actually being a lot more diversified in where they want to work alongside our business students. In comparison, however, are our engineers, who again, we saw fewer of them year on year and fewer again when we look at female. But when we look at our engineers, if we jump to that next slide, Grant, we can see the proportion of where those applications are becoming less diversified. Last year is a lot more even. We had a number of sectors, R&D, banking, quite up there in terms of the proportion they've got. Whereas this year, we're really seeing about 4 or 5 sectors that are really dominating that proportion. We're seeing some huge growth from sectors like mining, oil and gas, trading, for example, construction jumping up there again as well. Whereas others like tech have gone down. We've seen a drop from even your accounting advisory, your banking, I think has also gone down. Yes, it has, from 5.8 to 2.81 as well. So we're seeing a lot more students seem to be gravitating from our engineering cohort towards either sectors that are predominantly known as doing engineering roles, mining and consulting, etc. And also sectors that have typically a higher pay range as well. You're trading, again, you're mining as well. So this particular cohort of engineers being definitely one of the more interesting ones in terms of what they're doing, particularly how that bucks the trends of say business and IT students, for example. Now, for reference, we've done here like 3 of our key degree cohorts, the business, IT, engineers. We do have some of the stats also for humanities and law and sciences and other degree cohorts as well. If you are interested, let us know in the chat. We might try and get time to cover that off if we do at the end of the session. Otherwise, it's definitely in the slides as well for you. But I'll hand back to you, Grant, to talk about some more trends we've seen.
Yep. Thanks, Sam. Some really interesting trends there. So what's going on across Australia in terms of where are students searching from? And as you can see here, there's actually been an increase year on year, so from last year to 2023, in the number of students searching from New South Wales. So these are students that are in New South Wales and they're searching for jobs, and they could be either locally or across Australia or internationally as well. So we'll cover off where they're searching for jobs in a moment, but it's a proportion of students searching in these locations, if that makes sense. So like I said, so New South Wales, it's gone from 32% up to 36% this year. Victoria, pretty similar on 31%, a slight drop to 29%, and quite a big decline as well in Queensland. So there's fewer students in Queensland searching for jobs this year, from 18% in 2022 to 15% this year. Now, if we roll over onto this slide here, so where are students wanting to work? Again, if Sam is based in Victoria, but if he searches for a job in Sydney or Brisbane, or hopefully not doing this, Sam, but if you are to do, that's where this data will be appearing. So what's interesting is that 36% of searches were from New South Wales in that previous slide. However, only 30% of them are looking for jobs in New South Wales. On the flip side, 29% of students were searching for jobs in Victoria. However, 33% of students are actually looking for work in Victoria. Yeah, really interesting trends. Again, like we're splitting hairs a little bit here in terms of the number, but these are really interesting trends nonetheless to see where students are looking to actually work in. And there could be a whole multitude of factors. It could be students studying in different, so for example, they're in Melbourne, but they've got Sydney to study, or it might be from West Australia, but they've come to the East Coast to do their university degree or their master's, and they're looking for jobs back home, but nonetheless, super interesting. On top of that, so just for context, in 2020, when that horrible word starting with C hit in March in 2020, we saw a trend of students they were reaching out to us and they were saying, look, we want to work for jobs, like we want to work for employers in a remote capacity. We can see that there's all in the news that everyone's working from home. And as a byproduct of that, our product team moved rather quickly to add an additional option for students to enable them to search for jobs based on that they could work from anywhere. They could work remotely. So that was added mid-2020, I think maybe mid to late 2020, Sam. And what we've seen is in 2021, there was a little, there was 1% of students were searching for jobs remotely. That increased significantly last year to 11%. And then this year, it's actually held sway at 10%. And that's really interesting because speaking with employers and universities and students as well, we've seen that students have been saying that they still really value that flexible working arrangements of working in your offices, meeting their colleagues and that. But there's still definitely an appetite for students to look for remote jobs. And that's holding its way. So yeah, really interested to see how that trends moving into the future as we get past COVID. I mentioned that horrible C word. But yeah, it's interesting to see what happens in 2024 and beyond. Now let's have a quick look at the search trends by each specific region. But I mentioned, and there's a couple of questions in the chat earlier. Yes, these slides will be shared later on along with the reporting as well. And to Sam's point earlier, we'll be sharing, there's about 70 slides of data in here. So there's a lot that we won't cover off today in the interest of time, but we're getting through the highlight reel per se. So search trends by region, you can see Victoria, the vast majority of students that are looking for jobs in Victoria want to work in Melbourne Metro. And then it's a very smaller portion of students that want to work in the rest of regional Victoria. So that includes like your Ballarats, Bendigos, and so on. Again, similar to Western Australia, or for Western Australia, most students are searching for jobs in Perth, with a small smattering of students looking for work in Calgary and Albany, Busselton, and so on. If we turn our attention to South Australia, again, huge portion, 96% of students wanting to work for looking for a job in Adelaide Metro. Tasmania is a little bit more split up, and so about 3/4 of students are looking for jobs in Hobart. They're a little bit more flexible with where they want to work across Tasmania, with about 14% of students looking for jobs in Launceston, and about 9% of students looking for jobs in Burnie. If we turn our attention to New South Wales and Queensland, it actually tells a little bit of a different story. And I'd love to hear from the audience if you've been able to put your finger on why this is the case. But 76% of students want to work in Sydney Metro. Now, as I said before, with Victoria, that was in the high 80%, right? So Sydney's a little bit different. Now, that could be that New South Wales is quite a large state, and there's a lot of regional area, larger micro cities per se, like Newcastle, which is getting about 3% of the searches. Yeah, it could be a number of different facets at play there. What kind of stands out to me is that about 13% of students are looking for jobs in regional Victoria. So that's regional New South Wales. That's like of Orange, and so on, Dubbo, etc. So they're a lot more flexible with the types of opportunities they're searching for and which locations they want to work in. Again, similar to Queensland, about 72% of students want to work in Brisbane Metro. They want to work on the Gold Coast. That sounds pretty lovely as well. about 5% were working hands, and so on. So now I'd like to hand the mic back to you, Sam. I think you're going to take us through the trends.
Yep, thank you, Grant. And great to see as a proud Victorian that Victoria's back up and growth in popularity where students want to work. We're back. But yes, on to opportunity trends. So firstly, we'll look at a bit of a breakdown between our two most popular opportunity types: graduate jobs, graduate programs, clump them together, and our internships. So funnily enough, what we saw during COVID were fewer students year on year actually searching, like putting it into our filter saying, show me internships job in that sort of, again, first couple of months of the year. Again, just for this data, internship season typically is more popular at the middle of the year, but in still saying that we saw fewer of those searches as a proportion during the last couple of years. This year, however, that number has jumped up dramatically back to what numbers we were seeing closer to that 2019 level, on almost 28%, so it's been a 6% jump, shy of 30% of our students in the first couple of months of the year looking for internships, looking for them in the job searches. In terms of, however, what they were applied to, when we look at the applications proportion, we saw that it was actually pretty even year on year. There actually was limited change, only 1%. And so despite the fact there were more searches for internships year on year, that didn't see that same jump in terms of the applications they were making as well. One hypothesis that we have in regards to that is just there hasn't actually been a huge change in the number of internships that employers are posting in this period. We'll actually get to that. We've got some of that data too to talk to that, but I would expect that might be the case. And so maybe a little bit of an opportunity there for any of our employers who are considering an internship, thinking when they should be recruiting for as well. That's first couple of months of the year. There are definitely more students looking for those internships at that point. And with not as many applications being made then, I think there's some opportunity there to be a little bit more ahead of the competition, perhaps. Speaking of how many vacancies and positions we had live in our different months, at the start, we'll look at our total. And so again, just noting the number here is a vacancy number, so not individual job listings. So if one job says, I've got 500 positions available to my grads, or 5, that's the number we're looking at here. And so year on year, what we've seen across all months of the year to date, we haven't included May in this data, it's just the first 4 months, we saw more vacancies open to students on the platform by a fairly significant margin. Also worth noting here, the data is for opening month. And so if a job opened on, say, the 27th of February and closed the 28th of March, it was included, the vacancy numbers, in the February data. It's worth noting for that. When we break that down by graduates and interns, starting with graduates, we can see our biggest jumps were in the months of April and February, funnily enough. Particularly April, I find very interesting the number of vacancies we had on offer in that month, opening in that month, compared to years past. We do typically see, or in years past, we've typically seen a lot of jobs maybe closing in April, but not many opening as such. From the early data we've seen, again, it's not complete yet for the months of May, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a similar improvement for May and into June, the later half of the year as well, in terms of the number of vacancies available throughout the year. But really interesting to see the number of vacancies has been really consistent, increasing across all 3 of those key recruitment months year on year. February particularly is quite interesting. On to internships, we actually see a very different trend. Whereas graduates were quite even, all 3 months saw more vacancies, we've actually seen less vacancies opening in March and April year on year. Whereas February, just blown it out of the water. I'd expect potentially we might have seen a couple of key employers requiring lots of internships, maybe shift their recruitment back slightly into February, which might have taken some of last year's March numbers into February a little bit. But interesting again to see that the proportion overall of internships in these months is relatively consistent compared to the other graduates as well. Getting back to that point we were making about opportunity for any employers who are considering internships or considering when they recruit as well. March and April opening then, to me, particularly in April, seems like a bit of a no-brainer in terms of getting a bit more visibility outside of the hyper competition that we see in February and late February in particular, and March when positions are open. So it's a little bit about the split between grads and interns. One of the other big trends we've seen this year is between what we call generalist roles and generalist positions, postings, and role-specific postings. So to explain that a little bit further, with what we've seen in years past is a lot of us have been posting positions, just 2022 graduate program at, so to pick up PwC, at PwC here. Just one post covering all the multitudes of different roles within. Nice and easy for students to say, oh yeah, there's a graduate program. We've seen with students more recently, there is more interest in more role-specific listings. So for example, rather than just including this strategy associate job wrapped up in one big post, listing it separately, much like PwC has done in the second example, role-specific. So we've seen a lot more of these postings in the last 12, 24 months from our employer clients. And so particularly probably this campaign year, we've seen a lot more of that. And so what we want to look at is how that's actually gone for those employers. So in terms of the total proportion of applications received across our multitude of job listings this year, ones that were more role-specific, strategy associate, civil engineer, accounting graduate, those positions, those more role-specific positions received about 60%, 61% of the total applications on our platform, compared to about 38 or 40% for our more generalized listings. So like, again, graduate program 2022, intern program 2022, not really mentioning in the job title or even the job description what the exact role was. It might be multitudes of roles in that. We're just doing one big post, generalized post. There were more role-based jobs though, so we did actually think, okay, that's good. And then it's 60%. What was the actual, if we compare a job, Grant, vacancy numbers, what was the difference? And we found that you held vacancy numbers equal. A role-specific job received 14% more applications than your generalist job per vacancy as well. I mean, to me, that seems a bit of, again, a no-brainer in terms of reimagining strategy and getting more information and more students interested in our multitude of different positions that we have. Building on from that, we also saw different trends when we look at different degrees as well. Business students, similar to the overall trend, about 40-ish to 60-ish%, a bit less than that in this example of interest towards role versus generalist. Engineers, however, just shy of 70% compared to 30%, 67 to 32% to be exact. Really interesting that proportion of those students, the engineering students, preferring those role-specific jobs. Going back to the fact there are fewer of those students, they are more picky with they're wanting to work. Again, if I was recruiting for engineers next year, regardless of a bank or government or an engineering firm, I would definitely be trying to be more specific with my language, because the data is showing they do want to be able to see jobs that seem to align not just to their degree, in short. We look at the different cohorts as well. Sciences, a little bit more even. IT, again, a little bit more even in the split as well. I think it probably comes down to the fact they've been a bit more diverse in where they're looking for as well. And carrying on from that, when we look at your humanities and law students, funny enough, gone the opposite way. Part of me thinks, particularly humanities, that might be because there are fewer humanities-specific roles on the platform compared to very more popular with, say, government, particularly well-delivered general sub-programs as well. But very interesting that differs in our different cohorts of students as well. Law, I think, again, bit of a wait and see, given that most of the law-specific roles we'll see, Sydney clerkship program, your Melbourne clerkship, etc., will be coming in the next couple of months in comparison. But still very interesting signs to date. Finally, in terms of some salary trends, as we've mentioned at the start, as you all would probably know, we've been enforcing salary for the last 11-ish months, less than 10 months on the platform. Prior to that, a lot of other employers could also still post their salary too. Not everyone did it, but you could as well. And so we've got some historical salary data, which becomes quite interesting. This year, we decided to have a bit of an analysis to see what was the impact of that? What's the number of applications on average, a job would expect based off their different salary buckets. And as you'd probably expect, the higher the salary, the more interest there was for the most part with students. Up to a certain point though, plus the 100,000 mark, it actually gets gone back from the highs of 97, still above that under 90K mark, but it's gone down slightly. Part of me thinks maybe because it's fewer jobs, be part of it too. But also maybe like that indicates to a student they might also need to be of a certain higher standard that they might be expecting as well. Not entirely sure why that has occurred there, but very much that consistent trend in that average salary as well. Not huge jumps between that 70 to 80 range and 80 to 89, 900 range as well. Only a couple of extra applications and whatnot. So it seems that if you're in that sort of range as well, you can be pretty consistent with each other. It's when they go quite significantly up is when we see some big changes. And also the other way, of course, as well. The sub 60K salaries doing as you'd potentially expect in that range as well. Finally, just some data here on the changes we've seen in industries year on year. It is worth noting that the data here, rather than being 2022 to 2023, is 2021 to 2022 data. So we collate this at the end of each year, publish it in our average salary. Again, worth noting, 2021, we didn't have as full a picture compared to last year. That's worth noting. But in saying that, from what we do have available, we've seen some big jumps. The banking and financial services industry, significant jump in the salary average. Media and comms has gone down slightly. Engineering consulting between 2021 and 2022 went down slightly as well, but I do think that has actually rebounded significantly since then. So take that particular point, potentially a grain of salt. But overall, we've seen most industries have gone up in their salary range. Some by a lot, some by a lot less as well. Tech's also been a big jumper as well, interesting with us. That's a little bit about our opportunity type and salary type trends. Might throw back to you to talk more about the our student population. What have we got in the market right now?
Thanks, Sam. Thanks so much. And just tying a bow around the salary side of things, we collect, Sam alluded to it, we do an Australia and New Zealand salary guide every year, which lists out the average salary for each industry, salary based on each region and whatnot. So feel free to get in touch with us and download that free salary guide. And Sam alluded to that we started collecting the salary information about 2020, 2021. Over the last year or so, we've got more diligent with collecting that information, and naturally because it's enforced as well, I think that the information that we're getting from employers is probably more accurate as well. So I think that data, so Sam, you mentioned that the engineering consulting side of things that actually dropped last year. That's not what I've heard from engineering consulting from my clients as well, that actually increased last year and increased again this year. So it was, it's going to tell a fuller picture as we go as well and as we collect better data. But jumping into the commencement data, and actually if I take a bit of a backward step, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but DESI, this is the Department of Education, Skills and Employment. They collect this data, so both students who are graduating, so completing their degrees across Australia, and also commencing. So we're going to be walking through that data. This is all available online, but as Sam will attest to and our data team will attest to, it's pretty difficult to navigate. So we've tried to collate all this data into simple, easy, digestible slides that tell a bit of a story from what's going on, so you can keep your finger on the pulse. So what we're looking at here is a bit of a holistic overview of the total number of domestic students graduating from university and what degree they're essentially graduating with. So as we can see, there's a little bit of a trend line of engineering students that have increased slightly in 2021. You'll notice that it says 2021 and not last year or this year. And that's just because it takes a long time for these surveys and reports to be collated and put together, especially the graduation data. So there's always a year or so lag in that data, which has been unfortunate, but nonetheless, it tells an interesting story. So engineering, as I said, that's increased slightly. In terms of domestic graduates for business and management, or business and commerce rather, that's remained steady across the year, or across the last 5 years, I should say. And I see that as a little bit of a problem, if I'm honest, because we know that there's more accounting firms and more of our accounting firms are hiring more business and commerce graduates. Sam, you touched on this earlier, that there's been a decrease in the number of those accounting students applying for accounting positions. They're looking at management consulting and other sectors as well. It's interesting to keep the finger on the pulse there, because it is, unfortunately becoming a little bit more tricky to hire those grads as well, as the hiring numbers have increased year on year. And IT's remained steady as well since 2019, although, as I sort of touched on, it's also probably not enough to keep up with the demands of employers. And you'll see that in our application data as well. Employers are crying out to us and saying, we need more IT applications, need more accounting applications and whatnot. So this tells a bit of a story as to why, especially when you double up this data with what Sam walked through earlier. The number of employers that are hiring graduates has also increased, and the volume that they're hiring as well. If we turn our attention to international students, we've seen a decrease in business and management, quite a stark decrease, and a big increase in IT. So that's the red line, if you can see here. I'm gonna hold my light. This one spiked up quite significantly over the last couple of years. That's IT. And this kind of goes with the trend of what we've been hearing from universities, parents, careers advisors, and that. There's a big push in Singapore, Malaysia, and other countries encouraging students to study IT, as it's seen as a more employable degree for students. And therefore, I think that's why we're seeing a bit of a spike over the last couple of years in favour of your management, commerce, and arts, and so on, which we'll dive into in a tick. So let's have a look at the number of domestic IT graduates. So we've got female, and we can see here that female IT graduates has actually increased quite significantly over the last 5 years, and it's about 43%. So you can see, if I hover on my slide here, 2017, there was around just under 4,000 IT graduates. That number has actually increased significantly over the last few years. And like I said, female graduates, that's actually increased by 43% over the past 5 years. They're still small numbers, as you all know, especially if you hire IT grads, that female grads are few and far between, about 17% of the population. But the good news is that it is growing, and there's a lot of work being done at high school level to ensure that there's more females entering the university space and studying IT degrees, STEM-related disciplines. So it's starting to have a bit of an effect. Again, as you'll know, is if you hire IT grads, is that there's Indigenous grads are few and far between. There was actually only 39 Indigenous graduates that graduated from university last year with an IT degree. If we look at the number of students, international students studying IT, there's been a really big increase over the last 5 years. I alluded to that in the slide a little earlier. So if we look at 2017, there's around 3,000 students were graduating, international students were graduating with IT degrees. That's increased significantly over the last 5 years, up around 7,000 or so now. So it's also good food for thought if you're considering recruiting international students, and especially if you're struggling to attract applications from IT students. This could be a really good source of really good graduates, because there's quite a few of them graduating from university. And so if you can support them in their employment and whatnot, get them onto a 485 working visa, there's a lot of opportunity there in this space. Now, if you look at the number of domestic business, so management commerce graduates, as I said, it's plateaued a little bit. There's still a small but steady increase in the number of female grads studying these degrees in the last 5 years, from sort of 53.5% in 2017 up to 55% in 2021. And again, interestingly, 194 Indigenous students graduated last year or 2021 rather, with a business again, super competitive. I know, I work with a number of firms that are hiring business grads, and we've got a specific focus on attracting more Indigenous, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island students into the workforce. And they are unfortunately few and far between, 194. A lot more than IT, but still, as you all know, very competitive. And they've got a lot of opportunity out there. And the number of international business grads have remained steady over the last 5 years. There's a bit of an increase in 2018, 2019, and there's a little bit of a decline as well in 2021 and 2020. And I'll touch on that, why we think that might be the case in a moment. If we turn our attention to the number of domestic engineering graduates, we've seen a slight increase in domestic female engineering grads in the last 5 years. So 172 in 2017, and that's gone up to 977 in 2021. So that accounts for the 14.9% in 2017, the increase to 17.1. So there is a bit of an increase, but again, knowing a lot of engineering consulting firms and construction companies that are hiring engineering grads, they're all wanting somewhat of a 50-50 split in their cohort. And their numbers point to the fact of why it's really tricky. And you can utilize these slides. And a lot of my clients have utilized these slides in the past and shared them with upper management to say, hey, we're trying a lot of things to recruit these female grads and Indigenous grads, but it's just tricky. There's just very few of them that are graduating from university. I find this super interesting, and I touched on it before with IT, and we're seeing with engineering as well. The number of international students graduating with engineering degrees has absolutely skyrocketed over the last 5 years. So in 2017, there's around 3,000 international engineering grads, and now a little over, maybe it's a little under 7,000. So really interesting to see that's a more being seen by international students as perhaps a more employable degree, or at least it's been marketed that way at university and overseas as well. Now, if we look at the commencing data, so just to compartmentalize that a little bit, the commencing data is the number of students who are starting their studies at university. So look at this as what's in the pipeline for me and for my recruit grads in the next 3 to 4 years. And we can see there's a steady decrease in the number of art students, and that's been sort of going on for the last few years. There's a really big jump in health, nursing, occupational therapists, and so on. So that's the hover over here. That's my little blue line from 2020 to 2021. How much of that's COVID related? There was obviously in March 2020, there was a really big media everywhere that they needed more nurses and doctors and so on and so forth. So maybe that's contributing to the fact that more students are commencing their studies in those health degrees. And what I think is encouraging is that there's also been a steady increase in engineering and IT students as well commencing their studies in those disciplines. So for those who are hiring from those cohorts, I'm sure you're very happy to hear that there's starting to become a bit more of a pipeline in that space. If we look at international students commencing their studies, it's no surprise that there's a big drop in 2020 and 2021, especially for business and commerce degrees. Like I said, could be if COVID affected, or like I shared earlier, it could be just to see a trend that we're seeing into the future as well, with more international students preferring to study engineering and IT related degrees, as they're perhaps a little bit more employable than business and commerce. If we look at the number of domestic IT students commencing their studies, so let's drill into those numbers in a little bit more detail now. Like I said, this will make tech employers that hire tech students happy that there is a steady increase over the past 5 years. And encouragingly, there's been a 44% increase in the number of female IT students who are commencing their studies in the past 5 years as well. So if we look at that data from 2017, on the right-hand side, 16.8% of the cohort were female, and that's grown now to 19.7% in 2021. So some really encouraging signs there that is becoming a little bit more of a balance in the type of candidates that are entering or potentially entering the workforce, or at least studying IT degrees at uni. Again, if we flip the page to international IT students, again, seen quite a big jump from 2017 to 2019. That has decreased slightly over the last couple of years. Again, we do believe that's due to COVID. Actually, it was really difficult for international students to enter the country in 2020 and 2021. So hopefully we see a bit of an incline there over the next couple of years as well, as borders opened up and there's more encouragement from Australian universities and the government to come into Australia and can commence their degrees with Australian unis. What I think's a little worrisome for employers hiring management commerce students is, like I said, I touched on earlier, I think it's just only going to get more and more competitive in the future with a decline in the number of students commencing their studies. We mentioned this, it's plateaued a little bit in students graduating from those degrees. But on the flip side as well, we're seeing a bit of a decline in the number of students who are starting to complete their studies, studying business and commerce related degrees. And I know that a lot of my accounting employers are keeping a very close eye on this and try to work on things. Can they do things at the high school level, or can they recruit into more diverse backgrounds like TAFE students and so on and so forth to plug that gap in need, because it's only getting more competitive. And again, we're seeing a steady decline in international business students year on year. Again, 2020 and 2021 could very much be COVID related, but a very similar trend if we look back in 2017 and 2018. We started to see a little bit of a drop off there as well. So perhaps we've reached a bit of a peak in students studying those core subjects like accounting, economics, finance, and so on. But in big favour of those STEM related degrees. I might whip through to the last couple of slides because we've still got a little bit to get through, and I'm just seeing that we've only got a few minutes left. So we're going to break down in engineering students. That's increased slightly over the last 5 years, and the number of commencing students from international students studying engineering, that's declined quite a bit over the last couple of years. But again, 2020 and 2021 very much likely due to COVID-related impacts. Like I said, all these slides will be available, and more will be available. If you're attending today, we'll send them through the inbox. So don't worry if you've been madly scrambling to collate notes and that type of stuff. We will share them with you. But for now, I think I'm handing back to you, Sam, to walk through some tips as to what employers can actually do with all this data, and as they look forward to the rest of their recruitment year. We've got big internship recruitment season, the back end of this year, and obviously moving into 2024. So back to you, mate.
Thanks, Grant. So we'll walk through a couple of tips about, from our end, what we think, a couple of things you could potentially do to start looking to make sure that of the students that are out there in more challenging areas from, say, business, etc., how can you ensure you're standing out? So I'm going to start with the obvious one: improve your salary. And I'm sure a lot of you in the crowd are probably thinking, no duh, Sam, that's great. Yeah, of course, if we improve our salary, that would help. A bit harder than that. But if you haven't already started to have those conversations internally, done that research on how your graduate salary compares to others, I'd highly encourage you to do. I've seen a couple of sectors really taking the lead in that as well. So start to look into how's your salary compare? Is it competitive? Are you doing enough to stand out? But regardless of improving your salary overall, there's some other things you could do within your job copy, how you describe your jobs, to actually, with what you've got, stand out a little bit better. For example, using my government clients, for example, they've got an awesome increase in their super, 15.4% compared to the private sector. And so articulating that, like what this example does here, just underneath their salary description, their salary range, is a fantastic way to help stand your job out and describe a little bit more about the benefits. Same with, I mentioned there, the potential advancements after 6 months to a higher salary. We know students really care about their promotion opportunities and how they're going to progress. Articulate that. And not just from the actual dollar figures of what they could bring in. Talk through some of your perks. Be really clear with what they are as well. Don't just say, great welfare, or I don't know, something that's very fluffy that doesn't really give you anything. Like this great example here by picking on L'Oreal here, talking about product allowances they've got, and extra 5 days of leave, profit share bonus. You've got summer hours and things like that. And I was reading this myself. I was like, short of Friday hours, might have to leverage that, put a bit of pressure on Grant here. I reckon that sounds like a great idea, to be honest. So just talk to that, right? Students don't know what they don't know. Give examples of what cool perks that you have, particularly if you're a bit hamstrung, and increase your salary. Moving on to our next page though, keeping on the sort of lens of how to improve our jobs themselves. We see jobs are how you describe your job, or salary, just your overall job description, where it's seen, is probably the most important thing in this crowded market, particularly when there are thousands, hundreds of jobs like advertising those key February, March, April recruitment periods. So rethinking how you're describing the work that your students are really, particularly Gen Z, are really keen to do really interesting work that aligns with their values. So I've pulled out an example here about one of our government clients who talk more about the work, how they that relates to, say, climate change, cost of living, big things that Gen Z are keen about, and how that could make a difference. So leverage that. Thinking of new channels. So for example, like TikTok, a couple of examples here we've talked about a fair bit. last few months. How do you make your job stand out in exciting ways? Just doing it is not enough. You need to make sure it's aligned to Gen Z and their values and what they're interested in and being very authentic, but doing those new ways are really great. Even if your own currently utilized platforms, we'll use Prosper as an example, making sure if there are, say, 900 jobs open to students today, this is from today, making sure yours is the first one that they see, that makes a difference. It's competitive. There are a lot of jobs out there, let alone number of vacancies. And so being seen is honestly helpful. Which probably leads me into the next tip. Maybe it'd be worth reconsidering when you're recruiting. Do you need to go in February and March when all of those jobs were going live? Is it maybe worth considering April and May? Stretching that a little bit. Even it might be worth considering going for multiple months throughout the year. We see some great success, and we've seen a lot more employers, particularly some of our biggest firms who are hiring stacks of students in more recent years, really opening up their recruitment timelines to some of them almost 12 months. It's probably not feasible for everyone, particularly our small team people, but like maybe consider how do you make sure your job is not getting crowded out with everyone that's going live? Because there are students looking throughout the year, as we can see here. Maybe not as many compared to March, but stacks of students. Expanding your talent pool, we've spoken about at length in the last few years, whether it be hiring international students. We've spoken a little bit about that today, like looking at those female IT grads, the number of students you could potentially hire doubles when you open up to that cohort. Expanding, do you need a university qualification for some of your programs, or is maybe hiring TAFE students? They're not lowering the benchmark of the quality they can take in. They don't change like your assessment process, for example, but maybe is a university degree the be all end all in terms of what that looks like, particularly for cohorts like our Indigenous graduates, worth considering. Those of you curious about, we can share you some more slides we've got on that done in the past as well, but expand your talent pool, huge opportunity there. And finally, plan early, and not just in terms of your next year's campaign. If you're not already thinking about your February, March campaign right now, you are behind, just to put it quite bluntly. So start thinking of what you are doing already. Yeah, I know you're still probably mid-offering right now, but it's really important to start thinking about that. But plan it in the future as well. We're talking, let's look at the number of domestic commencements for commerce students. If those numbers are going down, and right now you're really struggling with your commerce, accounting, business graduates, that's only going to get worse, right? We can see that. There are fewer students who have started a degree in 2021 due to graduate in the next couple of years compared to the last few years. How are you engaging that cohort? Reminding you that about 18% of students are starting their job search by the end of their first year and into high school as well. What are you doing to interact with that cohort? How are you giving back value as well? Don't just say, I'm going to go and make sure my brand is out on campus. That's good, but how are you actually giving value at each of those stages of the job search as well, and at scale as well? Some food for thought there. But that is, I think, our final tip. Yep, appendix. And so we've got only a couple of minutes. We've got about 60 seconds or a lot of time left. So if you do have questions, we might try and answer a couple for those that want to stay on, do you think, Grant? And if you've got ideas on any of those tips as well, feel free to share for everyone too. But yeah, that's a little bit about what we're seeing this year. Hopefully they found that quite useful.
Thanks everyone for joining. We can stay on for a few minutes, Sam. There's a few questions that we can do a rapid fire responses to. I can take easiest one as always. So this is from an anonymous attendee. Is the salary including super? No, it's not. So the salary is excluding super. Sorry, we should have stated that a little bit earlier. It's excluding super benefits, bonuses and so on. Maybe I'll throw a question to you, Sam. Could it be said that students that are being a little bit pickier per se, given that applications per student didn't increase as much as the total number of searches? Any thoughts on that?
That base anecdotal, like what I've seen as well, but it does seem that is the case as well. We saw that a lot last year. In fact, one of the things we presented on last year was this fact that number of students were down, but they'll be a lot pickier, looking outside of the traditional graduate intern programs, looking at more entrepreneurial stuff potentially as well. I don't think that trend's gone away. I think they might be maybe looking for more and being a bit more considerate about where they look as the economy gets a bit more crazy. But we definitely haven't seen a return to, say, the crazy numbers of thrown out 20, 50 job adverts anywhere as possible compared to years past as well. It does seem that students are being more considerate. They're looking at they're applying for more jobs, spreading their heads a bit wider, but definitely been researching a little bit more and comparing employers too.
Thanks, Sam. Unfortunately, we don't have, there's a question around, is there any stats around fringe benefits tax, car, laptop, like those sort of allowances? We don't have any of that data, but it's good food for thought. That's something we could potentially collect in the future as well and collect for you all. There is a question around in professions like that, law, accounting, banking, do we, as impossible, think that employers are going to move away from grad recruitment and start recruiting straight out of high school and training them up? We've started to see that trend a little bit already. I know it's definitely more popular in places like the UK, who always feel like they're a few steps ahead in terms of grad recruitment and so on. They do some really cool, innovative things in the UK. And they've got a lot of pathway programs, cadetships and whatnot. As I said, we do have some employers that recruit straight out of high school and put them onto like cadetship programs, then pay for the students' studies to go through in the university or TAFE. So I can see that will become more popular moving forward. I don't think you'll see employers completely move away from recruiting university grads, but it's more so that they'll help to help them with those declining numbers in, for example, accounting, or if there's employers that are looking to hire engineering students and the number of engineering students coming out of university just doesn't fit their needs. There's just not enough supply there. I think that we will see a bit more of a movable focus on that high school market. But the trick is it's a very fragmented marketplace per se. In Australia, there's literally thousands of high schools. So like, where do you start is the question that a lot of employers always raise with me, because sure, you can go out and sponsor or connect with a few high schools in your local area, but it's certainly not a scalable approach. It's something that we've looked at in the past as well, as to how can we connect like more employers with high school students. Thankfully, actually, a lot of parents and high school students still use our platform because it's more of a careers discovery platform as opposed to just a jobs board. So it's not just jobs on there. So there's a lot of content accessible for high school students. So we are supporting them in some ways, but yeah, nonetheless, I do feel like it'll be more of a trend moving forward, especially in those hard to fill roles that we discussed at Dolphin today. Cool. Was there any other questions you wanted to cover off in the chat, Sam? Or
I think there was a question about tech, like the change in number of hiring in tech potentially being a determinant. I do think that it's probably quite likely. There's been a lot of chatter in the global market about tech industry and hiring numbers and things like that as well. So I do think that probably has made a bit of a difference in terms of why IT students are broadening the search, why the technology industry has gotten fewer applications from our tech and engineering students even as well. So I try to struggle to make this a definitive, this is the reason that IT students need more diverse, but I do think that's probably big. Yeah. I think there was another salary about, I'm sorry.
I was just going to touch on one. There's our stats that we've shared today, remove users who aren't applying, i.e. lurkers. I haven't heard that term before, but in terms of on our, but yeah, that's an up term. And that's why we would focus predominantly on the number of students applying for jobs rather than total users or total number of pages that they're viewed on the platform, because those lurkers, like your parents in high school, like it all adds up. Like the amount of visibility that you've got on the platform or any platform rather is obviously more beneficial than detrimental to your employer brand, helps you attract the right type of applications. But that's why we focus purely on the application volume, because that's when students are in that buying stage, right? They're actively ready to apply for jobs, and therefore they're applying on the platform as opposed to just jumping on the platform, looking at one or two employers and careers advice articles and jumping back off. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question. Any others, Sam?
I think there was a question about whether we think that the why Canberra is down is related to the state. I think it went from 7% in 2021 and 2020 down to 2%. I do think that is actually very much aligned to the fact that government has become less popular overall. So for reference, there are about 2-ish% of students who study in Canberra. And so that filter, it seems to be students who are wanting to work in Canberra, maybe a couple who want to move in there, whatnot, is remaining consistent, but there are fewer students, it seems, from other states who are wanting to go there as well, potentially relating to how popular it was during that 2020-21 period. It seems quite safe. It seems an industry where the jobs aren't going to disappear, whereas more recently that has changed somewhat. but also students we've seen the last couple of years being more open to opportunities where there is that sort of fast-paced growth and stuff in industries that are particularly private industries as well. Salary is a big thing in there too, I think, but I think it's more to do with the type of work that is implied in the student's mind. That's not correct, attached to government as well. But yeah, that's based on assumptions, but it does say that that's very, very linked as well.
Spot on. There's another question as well from Rob Cochran. Have you observed an increase in the number of employers, small, medium organizations offering grad programs? 100% yes. We've seen a big increase. I'm not sure if we've got that slide in this data set, Sam, in terms of the number of employers that are just hiring grads in total. I don't think we've walked through that today, but we've definitely seen an increase in the last 3 to 5 years of just the total number of employers hiring grads. And then to make it even more tricky is the number of employers that are hiring grads have also increased their hiring capacity as well. So instead of hiring, say, 20 grads a year, they've gone to 30, 40, 50 or more in some cases. That's dropped off a little bit this year due to the economic impact that you just touched on there, Sam. Yeah, that we've seen some employers like pause their program this year, particularly in the tech space, but then they'll open up back into this year. But overall, as a whole, we've seen definitely a big increase in the number of employers just hiring graduates and interns for a number of factors. Yeah, skill shortages is one thing. Yeah, it's also really expensive to hire a very experienced IT or engineering employee. Whereas if you go to the grad space, you can hire someone, especially as an intern, penny dollar per se. We have seen a bit of a shift, definitely over the last few years. Anything else, Sam, or should we call that a wrap?
I can't see any more. If there's any last ones, get them in right now. Otherwise, I reckon we'll wrap it up there. As mentioned earlier, we'll share a lot more of that data, such as, for example, law searches, as referenced earlier. We've got some data on humanities students, etc. I've been looking as well, so make sure that's included in there too for you, including the commencement data. I think it's got for most of the degrees, I think, right, from memory too. So it'll be a very comprehensive slide shared with you. We'll share the recording. We'll share also a article summarizing some of these key points that maybe you might be able to share internally. But it doesn't look like any more questions popped in, so I reckon we call it there.
Right.
Yep.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Sam. Been a delightful talk, as usual.
Yeah.
See you next time.
Thanks, everyone. See you soon.